We strongly encourage you to submit comments to us in writing. There's no limit to the length of written comments that you can submit. And our experience is that if you have lengthy or complicated arguments, it's best to make them in writing. That way we can carefully review them and be in a better position to respond to them as part of the rulemaking process. Now, the written comment period is open until June 21st, so that's 2 more weeks. And information on how to submit written comments is on our website, and I'll go over that at the end of the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Thank you. So, in order to save the time required to read into the record each provision of the proposed regulation and the related documents, I've already presented a copy of OEHHA's regulatory package to the court reporter that includes the public notice of these regulations, the initial statement of reasons, and related documents. As required by the Administrative Procedure Act, the public and interested parties were notified of these proposed regulations at least 45 days prior to today's hearing. The notice of this proposed regulation was published in the California Regulatory Notice Register on April 7th, 2017, was posted on OEHHA's website and sent by mail to interested parties who are on our listserv. On March 28th, 2017. So if the court reporter could go ahead and mark the exhibits as OEHHA's Exhibit A. Thank you. Maybe a number of you that aren't as familiar with the law as some others may be, so we want to just make sure everybody starts in the same place. Next slide. Oops, sorry, I guess I could do that. Okay, so we call it Prop 65, but the law that we're here under today is the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act of 1986. It was adopted as a ballot initiative, and OEHHA is the implementing agency for this law, and that means that we maintain the list of chemicals that are known to the state to cause cancer and reproductive toxicity. We have, over the last 30 years, identified about 850 chemicals that meet that criteria. Next slide. Sorry, did it again. So the specific requirements of Prop 65 are actually fairly limited. This law does not ban or restrict the use of any chemical. It applies only to businesses with 10 or more employees and does not apply to governmental entities, federal, state, or local. The law requires that businesses warn the public of significant exposures to chemicals that are on the list prior to exposure. Businesses are also prohibited from discharging significant amounts of the listed chemicals to sources of drinking water, although there are a number of exceptions to that particular rule. The Attorney General, local prosecutors, and private citizens can sue to enforce the law civilly. And just as an aside, even though it's kind of unusual, as the implementing agency, we actually don't have enforcement authority under Prop 65. So if you are interested in the enforcement aspects of the law, that's not what we do here. We do the science.
Public hearing stage, but I'm going to talk more about that first box, the scientific analysis. Okay. So the scientific analysis for NSRL development involves a dose response assessment. And a dose response assessment is performed to determine a chemical's likelihood of causing cancer, depending on the dose received. The figure on this slide, that graph, shows a dose response. The fraction of the animals with a particular biological response, in this case we're talking about tumors, is plotted on the vertical axis, and that's plotted by dose. So at the far left, on the bottom zero dose, and dose would increase. And you see that there are 4 points on this graph. So as the dose increased, the fraction of animals in each group with a tumor increased. So we analyze those response curves like this, and we estimate the slope of that dose response curve in the lower dose range, and we derive something we call the cancer potency estimate. That's an estimate of the slope at the low dose range. It's a measure of a chemical's potency as a carcinogen. Now, below that figure, I have another bullet. It talks about exposure assessment. An exposure assessment is a different type of analysis altogether, and we have not done one. Exposure assessment is used to determine the actual level of exposure from a product or an activity. And exposure assessments for specific exposures are done by businesses causing the exposure and by others, like us and other groups. And those estimated levels of exposure can then be compared to the no significant risk level to determine if a warning is required.
My name's Laura Hayes. I'm from Granite Bay, and I'm a parent of 3 now adult children, and looking forward to being a grandparent one day, and I'd like to be a grandparent of healthy children. Members of OEHHA, you have before you a critically important decision to make. Do you permit the use of glyphosate, which is now pervasive in the soil in which our food is grown, the water which we drink, the meats and foods which we consume, and the air that we breathe? Do you permit this toxic chemicals use at the random rate of 1,100 micrograms per day per person with no accurate way to monitor or enforce such a rate, and with no accounting for a person's age, weight, health status, types of exposures, or present load of toxins? Or do you permit the use of glyphosate at a lower but still random rate, which also cannot be accurately monitored or enforced, and again, without personal factors taken into account? Or do you act on the growing body of evidence that shows that there is no safe level of glyphosate and declare that its use will no longer be permitted in the state of California? At this point in time, and we'll hear from some of our esteemed scientists today, we know that glyphosate is both tumorigenic and carcinogenic, meaning that it causes both tumors and cancer. We know that it causes cancer cells to proliferate, whether it was the original cause of those cells or not. We know that glyphosate is a neurotoxin, meaning that it damages the brain. We know that it is an endocrine system disruptor, meaning that it adversely affects hormones, causing developmental, reproductive, neurological, and immunological problems. We know that glyphosate can substitute for glycine during protein synthesis. I have attached a list from Dr. Stephanie Seneff of MIT, which explains the many negative health consequences that result when glyphosate substitutes for glycine during protein synthesis. She considers one of the most serious consequences to be the disruption of digestive enzymes, which can result in autoimmune disease. To break things down to a very practical level, here are a few questions to consider. Number 1, if I asked you which apple you wanted to eat or feed to your child or grandchild, would you choose the one sprayed with poison, i.e. with glyphosate, or the one not sprayed with poison, the clean and untainted one? Question 2, if I asked you which glass of water you wanted to drink or give to your child or grandchild, would you choose the one in which glyphosate runoff was present, or the one without a known carcinogen and no neurotoxin included? Question 3, if I asked you which plate of food you wanted to eat or give to your daughter or granddaughter who is breastfeeding her newborn, would you choose the plate of food on which the meat, potatoes, vegetables, and roll were all heavily laced with the skull and crossbones labeled glyphosate, whose Monsanto testers wear hazmat suits when field testing it? Or would you choose the plate of food cleanly raised, and which was grown with no known health hazards. Final question. How will you answer your spouse, children, and grandchildren who receive a cancer diagnosis, who struggle with infertility, who suffer from thyroid problems, who are brain damaged in some way, or who succumb to any of the myriad health and development issues now plaguing our population in never-seen-before numbers, when they ask you if you personally ever permitted anything known to be carcinogenic, neurotoxic, or hormone and endocrine disrupting during your tenure at OEHHA. Each of you knows what the right thing to do is. The question is, will you choose to do it? Thank you.
My name is Joshua Coleman. I'm a California resident. I was born and raised here. I'm just going to keep this short and sweet. I'm not comfortable with any level of poisons, glyphosate in California, and I'm hoping that we will completely limit it to nothing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us here. I'm Heather Kovac from South Lake Tahoe, and I would like to say I agree entirely with Laura Hayes and also Josh. I think it's alarming how we're finding glyphosate in just about everything we eat and drink, and that is even supposed to be organic. And as a mother of 2 boys, I hope that you could come to no safe level for this chemical. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Janelle Lewis. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a longtime credentialed teacher, and an advocate and activist for people with developmental disabilities, many of whom have been tragically impacted by environmental toxins, including pesticides. I'm passionate about researching and understanding the impact that environmental toxins are having on the health and well-being of our children. Many thanks to all who have been involved with adding glyphosate to the California State Proposition 65 toxics list. When an NSRL, no significant risk level for glyphosate, is established, that level must be 0. Exposure to glyphosate is not in isolation. It acts synergistically and cumulatively, affecting different individuals very differently, and unpredictably based on age, weight, genetic predisposition, previous toxic exposures, existing health conditions, many factors. It is preposterous to say that there is any level of glyphosate exposure without significant risk for a newborn baby, for example. What is the risk level for someone who already suffers from myriad health problems from severe toxic exposures? We do not know the risk levels for any one person at any given time in their lives. I hope this is taken into consideration when science is evaluated. For many years, I was a classroom teacher for children of migrant farm workers in Central California. Those children and their families intimately knew about the risks of glyphosate exposure, even though they were told that their exposure to glyphosate was perfectly safe. They knew enough not to eat, nor to let me eat, the crops that came from the fields in which they worked, fields that were heavily sprayed with Roundup. The parents told me stories about frequent miscarriages, about skin and eye lesions, about respiratory problems and vomiting, and about cancers that resulted from working in the fields. They knew firsthand the cause of their health problems. They did not need a scientist to tell them. A recent UCLA study, which I've attached to my statement, found that the advanced thyroid cancer rate in some California counties is well above the national average. The research suggested that there was an environmental component in explaining why the incidence of advanced stage thyroid cancer is much higher in California than the national average. Dr. Avital Harari, a member of the UCLA Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center, said, "California has the largest amount of farmland in the country, so this type of exposure could very well contribute to our cancer rates." The research continues in investigating the links between thyroid cancer and exposure to pesticides. People deserve to know the risks associated with glyphosate exposure. Whether they are working in agriculture, shopping at the grocery store, feeding a pet, or playing on a sports field, they deserve to know that there is no guaranteed safe amount of exposure. We all come with different accumulated toxic loads, with differing synergies, with different health profiles, different genetic makeups, different ages. There is no safe, allowable daily exposure to glyphosate for any of us. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panel for this opportunity to speak and address this issue on the proposed no significant risk level for the chemical glyphosate to be adopted into regulation in Title 27. I'd first say that there are no safe levels of glyphosate. That statement originated with me in my studies over the past several years. I've written 6 papers on the subject. I have 2 more in process. I'm continuing the research in glyphosate. Glyphosate is a synthetic amino acid, an analog of our canonical amino acid glycine. It participates in both plant and animal biology, contrary to what was originally thought by Monsanto, that it only affected plants, archaea, and bacteria. 1 microgram of glyphosate technical acid, phosphonamet, and phosphonomethylglycine contains 3.561 trillion molecules. Each of those molecules are capable of integrating with protein, altering shape, folding, and function. I am a U.S. scientist and hazardous chemical material consultant and expert on the subject of glyphosate. I'm one of the few people that received all of Monsanto's trade secret studies of glyphosate from the U.S. EPA. The federal agency supplied me these documents in excess of 100,000 pages. I now have 6 peer-reviewed papers. I call on the California Environmental Protection Agency to immediately ban this chemical and not to set a limit of 1,100 parts per billion for this chemical. There should be 0 tolerance for this chemical, and I'll explain. Monsanto claims glyphosate to be safe to animals and humans because they do not possess the shikimate pathway, a pathway which is disrupted by glyphosate in plants, archaea, and bacteria. Glyphosate is known to disrupt the enzyme EPSP synthase, or 5-enolpyrolyl shikimate 3-phosphate synthase. However, this statement is now inherently false, as glyphosate was found by Samsel in 2016 to inhibit digestive enzymes and others found in animals and humans. Glyphosate is a protease inhibitor, including digestive enzymes. Such disruption of human enzymes is well known to lead to a host of modern diseases, including cancer. Again, lysosome is an antibacterial enzyme that is an integral part of the innate immune system of humans and other animals. Monsanto found significant tissue damage to all glands and organs in their 2-year long-term studies of glyphosate in mice and rats. Tissue damage stimulates the production of fibrocytes. Glyphosate reaches the end of the line in the capillaries in the extracellular matrix, where it is escorted 1 molecule at a time into the cell, where it participates in protein synthesis and is excreted by the cell. This I noted in my past 2 papers, Glyphosate 5 and 6. Fibroblasts also produce the structural proteins which include the 27 types of collagen, elastin, glycosaminoglycans, and the glycoproteins of the extracellular matrix. So glyphosate is along for the ride, even bridging assembling strands of proteins affecting shape, folding, and function. Glyphosate should not be part of any biology. Also, fibrocytes and fibroblasts are differing states of the same cell, the fibroblasts of which are involved in immune regulation via TAF-derived elements of the ECM modulators. These ECM components, like TSP1, are associated with sites of chronic inflammation in carcinomas. This is where glyphosate causes many funky cancers, as its association with fibroblasts. I've published results of lab analysis and experiments of glyphosate integration with structural proteins. You'll note that Stephanie Seneff, my colleague, is also co-author of all of these papers with me. The laboratory work and the enzyme research is my ongoing work, and I'd be happy to supply any additional information to you folks. The protein function involves ligation of ions in both small and large molecules through random collisions. Oops, sorry. Okay. Could I take 1 minute?
If you could wrap up, yeah.
Okay. Protein function involves ligation of ions of both small, large molecules through random collisions. The ligation involves the wrapping of the substrate around protein, which changes its shape, blocks its ability to function. In conclusion, glyphosate, in conclusion, the fact that glyphosate integrates with human enzymes, as published in our last paper, it should be enough reason to ban the chemical completely and also to prevent any level of glyphosate being allowed into the food supply. There should be no glyphosate in the food supply nor in drinking water, air, or soil. Glyphosate is a synthetic amino acid that should have no place in biology. We are about one biosphere. What affects one affects all.
All right, thank you.
My name is Zen Honeycutt, and I'm the mom of 3 boys who had severe health issues before we began avoiding glyphosate in our diet. I'm also the founder and director of Moms Across America, and I speak on behalf of thousands of mothers and families who are struggling with health issues in California. We do not want any glyphosate exposure to our children through food, water, the environment, or any products. We want the current products which do contain glyphosate to be immediately labeled. The current scientific data and skyrocketing numbers of our children and family members with chronic illness and cancer show us that the only ethical action for the California EPA is to declare a no safe level of glyphosate, 0. Before you dismiss this request as unreasonable, consider that the amount of glyphosate in our food and the OEHHA current proposal is actually what is unreasonable. The levels of glyphosate in our food currently and the risk we face due to the allowable levels of glyphosate residues are as set by the EPA are as follows. This is for a 22-pound child throughout the day. On the left side, you can see, go ahead. On the left side, you can see the amount that has been detected by the FBA. On the right side, you can see the amount that is allowed by the EPA. Again, on the left side, 1,640 detected for hummus and pita. On the right side, allowed 5,100. This is micrograms per kilograms. This math is all checked over by a scientist. UG is detected for in milk. There is no allowable level by the EPA in milk. Corn chips, up to 2,547. Okay, are you showing that they can see? Okay, thank you. And then berries, allowed 22 milligrams per kilo. Pasta, 560. Sorry, this one shouldn't be in here because we couldn't determine eggs and all that. Orange juice, water, this is per day. Eggs, this actually exceeds the amount that has been detected, exceeds what the EPA allows. In one piece of toast and jam, our child is currently right now exceeding the proposed NSRL. So the total intake of a child in America today is currently at least 2.2 times higher than the proposed NSRL, and the risk that you have to consider the risk of the EPA is 5.6 times higher. So it's clear that the amount of glyphosate in our children are and could be exposed to, according to the EPA, is millions of times higher than has been shown to cause liver disease, destroy the gut bacteria, or cause cancer. According to the law, which is 25703 California Code of Regulations, this was not followed. The OEHHA is supposed to consider all available studies showing harm, including epidemiological studies for exposure. For example, in Massange and Michael Antonu's study of 4 nanograms per kilogram caused liver disease, which predisposes cancer. This study is levels 4,000 times lower than the proposed NSRL. Karusko's and Monica Kruger's studies, glyphosate has shown to destroy beneficial gut bacteria at 0.1 parts per billion, which is in micrograms, and promote the proliferation of pathogenic gut bacteria. The gut bacteria is where 70% of the immune system lies, making a child much more likely to get cancer. And cancer is now the #1 or 2 killer of children in America today. High levels of daily glyphosate exposure can create an environment for the gut for candida and fungus, which cause inflammation and can contribute to autoimmune disease and cancer. Destroyed gut bacteria cannot expel heavy metals properly. The toxins build up in the liver and the body, which can lead to cancer. When glyphosate destroys the gut bacteria, the gut biome can no longer make essential hormones, which can lead to multiple forms of cancer, such as thyroid, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, breast and reproductive cancers. 1 out of 2 males and 1 out of 3 females in America are expected to get cancer today. The lowest level of glyphosate showing harm is Tongprong's study of 1 part per trillion, showing glyphosate stimulating the growth of breast cancer in vitro. This means, according to the EPA, that the lowest level should be 100-fold less, the NSRL should be 100-fold less than this, which is actually 10 parts per quadrillion, which is picograms. This is millions of times lower than the proposed NSRL. However, because of Ridley and Murley's and Monica Kruger studies showing that glyphosate bioaccumulates in the bone marrow, that 10 parts per quadrillion should be a one-time lifetime exposure, not daily. Bioaccumulation is why there is no safe level of glyphosate. I want you to know, I know I just have seconds left, I get contacted by moms every day that they have chronic illness or cancer. My son is avoiding cancer by avoiding glyphosate. He had gut inflammation. But we can afford organic. What about the families that cannot afford organic? You have an opportunity for all of Californians to help the people who cannot afford organic to reduce their exposure to glyphosate, because we know that when we have a no safe level of glyphosate, food companies will have to label their food, and instead of labeling their food, they will take ingredients out that contain glyphosate. We can shift the health of the entire state and country by you setting a no safe level of glyphosate. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Chavez, and I'm here on behalf of Arturo Rodriguez, President of United Farm Workers, who has asked me to make a statement on behalf of United Farm Workers. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment regarding the proposed no significant risk level of Roundup. For over 50 years, United Farm Workers has worked against farm worker exposure to harmful, cancer-causing pesticides, and has worked to protect farm workers and consumers from systematic poisoning through the reckless use of agricultural toxins and chemicals. There is nothing the UFW cares more about than the lives and safety of our farm worker families. There is nothing we share more deeply in common with the consumer of our food than the safety of all food of us, the food that we are relying upon. What good does it do to achieve economic progress for people when their health is destroyed in the process? What good does it do to buy California when the food we are buying is not safe? Just last month, the pesticide spraying stopped farm workers from harvesting in Bakersfield. The workers were in the process of harvesting cabbage when they began to get sick. About 12 reported symptoms from vomiting, nausea, and 1 person fainted. In the end, more than 50 farm workers were likely exposed to the chemical ingredients that damage parts of the brain that control language, memory, behavior, and emotion. Farm worker poisoning and illegal use of pesticides is commonplace in our state. And because our people are so poor, because the color of our skin is dark, because we often don't speak the language, because we are not documented, because we face renewed threats of deportation, because farm workers are less likely to report these poisonings to local and state officials, the UFW must stand up today against the further threats to health, safety, and lives. Roundup has recently gained attention over the last several years for the increased association of the product and its ingredients known to cause cancer by the state. Today we are discussing labeling the same product as safe based on the level of just one of its ingredients. However, the report and studies done did not factor in or study the other ingredients in Roundup's recipe, which are known to the state to cause cancer. Users spray Roundup, they don't just spray one ingredient of Roundup. Labeling a product as safe when it is not known, when it has not been properly studied, will continue to expose Californians and farm workers to dangerous chemicals known and possibly unknown to the state to cause cancer. This is reckless. The UFW requests that you to use science responsibly by testing the product used by millions before determining what level of cancer-causing chemicals is safe. The UFW requests you don't turn a blind eye to the other ingredients. Recommending a label that is safe when so much information about Roundup remains unknown poses a significant risk to farm workers who harvest our food, and to our communities and the families who use the product at home. Thank you.
Hi, I want to thank the California EPA for this opportunity to provide information and/or new perspective regarding the recently proposed NSRL. Unfortunately, coming this late, a lot of my stuff has already been said, so I'm going to have to edit as I go along. But a concern I've had over the years is that as industrial agriculture applications of glyphosate has expanded, so has the contamination of food and water increased. And in response, the U.S. authorities have periodically elevated the maximum allowable safe, put that in quotes, amount of glyphosate residue in what we eat and drink. In essence, these are pragmatic decisions to accommodate existing real-world residue levels of existing agricultural practices. This is not reliable science. It does not follow the precautionary principle. And I just want to make sure that's observed. Let's see, some toxicity was one of my issues. Glyphosate doesn't follow the typical dose response curve. It's not linear. It's non-linear as are recognized from many endocrine disruptors. And I think it was mentioned already, but Monsanto's own data, they showed that about 30% of ingested glyphosate is retained in animals. The rest is excreted, but about 1% of it is retained. I think Anthony mentioned this as it crosses the cell barrier and so on. That gets into our biology, which is a really tragic issue. I mean, we're dealing with glycine. Glycine is very critical to our survival, and we don't mess with glycine. We just don't do that. So I won't go through how the toxicity occurs. Although I should mention, to reemphasize this, that glyphosate does constantly circulate in the bloodstream. It's also in the lymphatic system and cerebral spinal fluid. And it circulates for about 2 weeks, and it's a long time. And so while that's circulating, you're also gaining more doses as you eat more, ingest more, whether it's ingesting, drinking, inhaling, or vaccines. Vaccines have glyphosate too. And I think it's really important, again, to emphasize that those malformed proteins that Anthony talked about, they're excreted back out into the extracellular matrix, but then they're participating in cell management, communication, and tissue structure. This is crazy. I mean, for example, collagen will be utilized, that collagen that comes out will be utilized in bone, skin, muscle, tendons, cartilage, teeth, whatever. But the integrity and functionality of it is now defective. And as Anthony mentioned also, or consider other proteins that are coming out, such as digestive enzymes that can no longer function in breaking down food into nutrients that can be absorbed by our bodies. This negatively affects our biology at a very fundamental level. Let's see. Well, this kind of reiterates what some other people said. I mentioned about circulating for up to 2 weeks. And it's everywhere in our body, all tissues, organs, and bodily fluids. And how many different exposures are likely to occur in a day, a week, or a month? How large is each exposure? What is the frequency of such exposures? And how could one possibly regulate, with any degree of accuracy, their intake? It's virtually impossible to protect oneself from this all-pervasive chemical. I want to go to another issue because it's kind of basic in how we review this. It's administrative and related scientific problems. The cancer-related data that's been provided over the years by the EPA has recently been brought into question because of apparent collusion between Monsanto and certain individuals at the EPA, all for the benefit of Monsanto. Because of this apparent collusion, U.S. Congressman Ted Lieu recently issued a press release stating that consumers should, quote, consumers should immediately stop using Roundup because of the non-Hodgkin lymphoma risk as determined by IARC. And then his release also suggested that a Department of Justice investigation is warranted to look at any potential misconduct by employees at the EPA. A week ago, the EPA's Inspector General, part of the DOJ, requested the EPA OIG Office of Investigations, quote, conduct an inquiry into several agency glyphosate review-related matters. It's a big deal. The entire relationship between Monsanto and the EPA appears to have been corrupt for many years. Therefore, the glyphosate regulatory decisions of the EPA over those years are certainly questionable, including the original registration of glyphosate and the ongoing re-registration process. Until the tainted administrative and scientific issues are properly sorted out, glyphosate should not be allowed on the market at any concentration because the potential risks are and have been far too great. Overall, glyphosate poses an unreasonable risk of adverse effects to humans, animals, and the environment. There is no, quote, safe level, end quote, for glyphosate, and it should not be in a food supply, water, air, soil, or vaccines. It causes damage wherever it goes.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And I'm hoping I'm going to be able to pose some more concerns that I have and questions. I'm an integrative pediatrician. I've been doing pediatrics for the past 36 years. I'm old and I'm actually a little tired. The reason why I'm tired is because I take care of chronically ill kids. Kids are tough. What I'm seeing now are sicker kids. 1 and 2 children have a chronic disease. The place where these diseases lurk are in immune dysfunction. Now, I know we're here to talk about carcinogenic aspects and the NSRL, but in children that's really hard to study because cancer takes a long time to develop. You're not going to see any cases. As a matter of fact, the rate of cancer in children has only slowly grown to, and it's the second leading cause of death. It's increased 50% in the past 40 years, but it's not very high right now. But what is high are autoimmune diseases. And that is probably within the 10 top leading causes of death in female children. So what we're seeing now is immune dysfunction in children based on gut dysfunction, which then leads to autoimmune disease, which is on the rise, and I can give you those stats, which is the precursor to cancer. So to talk about cancer specifically is problematic for children. So that's my first point. The other problem is that glyphosate it's a toxic substance. Some children will be able to clear it, some can't. There are 2 mechanisms for detoxification. One is your gut microbiome, and the second is your liver. Now, we have 2 problems there. The gut microbiome is affected by glyphosate because it's a mild antibiotic. We all know that Monsanto patented that in 2002 as an antibiotic. We know that. That's basic knowledge. And so what's problematic with the liver is that your liver is your second line of defense for detoxification. What Michael Antonio and his group out of King's College so eloquently shown, you heard the study already mentioned, is that glyphosate in levels, and he used Roundup specifically, in levels of 0.1 parts per billion it wasn't correlated with caused liver damage linked to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, precursor to NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, precursor to cirrhosis. We know that in obese children, which affects right now 20% of American children, of that group, 30% now have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we now have kids who have an impaired gut function called dysbiosis. We have children who have secondary liver toxicity, secondary to glyphosate and whatever other chemical soup they're being exposed to because we don't actually look at it. Some can handle the toxins or intoxicants, some cannot. Who can and who cannot is unknown, it's not been studied. What the gut microbiome looks like in children, not been studied. The effect of pesticides on this, not been studied. We know that pesticides are now looking at antibiotics as pesticides. That's where it's going. So how to determine what a safe level is nearly impossible because we don't know. And because we're all individual, it will not affect all children equally. This formula that you place, thank you so much, the NSRL formula, 10 to the 5th times 70 kilos, well, that's for a 70-kilo adult male or female and not a 3-kilo baby. So the formula doesn't pertain to children. So we have all sorts of problems with these formulations in the pediatric population. So because I'm hoping you can help me with my clinical practice, you're invited to come with me to my office any day and see what I deal with. I see what you deal with here. This is, you can keep this, I'll keep my clinic. I need some help because I have found that there's no safe level of glyphosate. You should also know that I have learned to treat glyphosate poisoning and I've been successfully able to clear it from children, and I actually do glyphosate testing using a lab. So I can test for it, I can treat it, I can clear it, and kids get better. What's problematic is that this is not general knowledge. Most pediatricians don't do this or know about it.
And the study considered by OEHHA in determining the safe harbor. Moreover, the initial statement of reasons does not propose how exemption from the Prop 65 requirement based on the NSRL would function in practice. Glyphosate or Roundup rather, is used in a variety of different industries by different applicators with varying exposure levels. For example, it is not clear whether a particular user falls within the safe harbor if throughout the course of a week they are exposed to varying levels, including 1100 micrograms, 2200 micrograms, and 3500 micrograms. It is not clear how such a high NSRL, which has been calculated absent consideration of any epidemiological human adverse data or a sufficient number of animal bioassays, is reconcilable with the known fact that glyphosate is a human carcinogen, as espoused by the IARC and known to the state of California. The public ought not to be exposed to high levels of a cancerous chemical without more extensive investigation and analysis by OEHHA of the available data and an effort to follow the requirements of the code of regulations. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I understand that OEHHA is one of the most progressive and concerned regulatory agencies in the country, and we thank you for that. I was very moved by listening to, by the way, my name is Bob McFarland. I'm the president of the California Guild. California Guild is one of the oldest agricultural organizations in the country. We incorporated in 1946, and we have over 5,000 members serving 80 communities across California. I was very moved by the gentleman from the UFW who spoke about the workers out there in the fields and their exposure to glyphosate. And I just have this terrible scene of them out there harvesting the food we eat while the owners, often corporations, sit in their living rooms watching the Giants-Dodgers game. So I think we need to be very much aware of the people that come into physical contact with this herbicide. I'd like to introduce today that there's more concerns than just health concerns regarding glyphosate. There's a movement across the globe to ban glyphosate from countries like the Netherlands and Sri Lanka and Colombia, Bermuda, Malta, Argentina, El Salvador, Germany, and France. And this will continue because the studies that are being done and the evidence that is coming out about this harmful chemical is going to cause more countries to ban this. That's going to affect the economic health of farmers in California because they cannot export their crops. So that's an important concern. You heard the doctor talk about liver disease. Well, I just happen to be a victim of non-alcoholic liver disease. And I have never been a drinker. My doctors ask me that. I've been through 2 or 3 years of batteries of tests to try to determine the cause of my liver disease. I've never had hepatitis, and they are baffled as to the cause of this disease. But I've recently been told by a doctor that it's more than likely glyphosate. And thank goodness, if it can be determined to be glyphosate, there is treatment. So we have a responsibility to the public and people that have this terrible disease to educate them that their livers may be being destroyed by glyphosates. It's funny that we've reached a point where our species has, supposedly the most advanced species, has come to a point where we accept certain capacities of poisons in our food and in our water. I don't know if we're the most highly evolved species. You know, there's studies that show that animals can tell foods that are contaminated by glyphosates and other contaminants, and foods that are fresh and uncontaminated, and they eat the uncontaminated stuff. So you tell me, are we the most highly evolved species? I don't know. I got a question about that. So, you know, you have an impossible task to determine what amount of poison will be allowed in our water and our food supply. And I have great sympathy for you because I gotta believe that if you're mothers and fathers, if you're citizens, if you care about our children, if you care about future generations, the only real answer is no level of glyphosate in our food and water. Thank you.
My name is Donna Farmer, and I'm a senior toxicologist at Monsanto's Regulatory Product Safety Center. I've spent 25 years looking at the safety of herbicides, specifically glyphosate, for 20 years. and I'm fully confident in the safety of glyphosate. Glyphosate and glyphosate-based herbicides have a history of more than 40 years of safe use around the world and are supported by one of the most extensive worldwide human health and environmental effects databases ever compiled for a pesticide product, including 7 complete regulatory data packages representing hundreds of studies. These regulatory required data packages have been developed by different registrars in different testing facilities from different regions around the world over decades. Regarding carcinogenicity, regulatory agencies whose job it is to approve and regulate pesticides have reviewed and re-reviewed over those past 40 years the rat and mouse carcinogenicity studies and have consistently concluded, based on the weight of evidence analysis of all the data, published and unpublished, including epidemiology and genotoxicity and rodent carcinogenicity studies, that glyphosate does not pose a carcinogenic hazard to humans. The outlier on this issue is IARC, a working group of which concluded glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen. Solely based on this determination, OEHHA proposed a ministerial listing of glyphosate under Proposition 65. The IARC working group did not make its conclusion based on sufficient evidence in human studies. Instead, it based its conclusion of sufficient evidence on 4 animal studies in rodents, which OEHHA found to meet the criteria of the regulations. To be clear, no regulatory agency in the world considers glyphosate to be a human carcinogen. Nearly 24 regulatory and scientific bodies, which variously review the same 4 animal studies that the IARC working group reviewed, reached the opposite conclusion, that the tumors were not related to treatment and glyphosate is not shown to be carcinogenic. These include OEHHA in its own independent review of the data in 2007, as well as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in September 2016, finding none of the tumors in 15 different animal studies are related to the administration of glyphosate and concluding that glyphosate should be classified as not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. Similarly, no less than 9 additional regulatory agencies across the globe have conducted assessments after the IARC determination and included the IARC monograph in their reviews. These post-IARC reviews are from Australia, Canada, 3 from the European Union, Korea, the WHO, JMPR, New Zealand, and Japan. The conclusions of these agencies' reviews are consistent with those recent and previous conclusions by the US EPA, as well as those of regulatory authorities and international bodies around the world over the 40-year history of glyphosate. That glyphosate is not genotoxic, does not produce tumors in animals, or any cancer, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in humans. Therefore, OEHHA's reliance on male mouse hemangiosarcomas, as identified by IARC, is not justified for derivation of a NSRL regulatory value. And Dr. James Buss will discuss this further. And Mr. Trent Norris will provide reasons why OEHHA has the authority to establish an infinite NSRL. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is James Buss, and I'm a board-certified toxicologist with the consulting firm Exponent. I'm here today representing the Monsanto Company and am commenting that OEHHA's reliance on male mouse hemangiosarcomas, as identified by IARC, is not justified for the derivation of an NSRL for the following reasons. First, a JMPR review concluded that hemangiosarcomas were not statistically significant by pairwise comparison, and the tumor response was well within the historical control incidence. Second, although an IARC-conducted trend analysis identified hemangiosarcomas as statistically significant, Dr. Joseph Haseman, in public comment to a December 2016 EPA Science Advisory Panel, noted that only 11 positive tumor trends, including mouse hemangiosarcomas, were observed across the 9 rat and 6 mouse cancer studies evaluated by EPA, while approximately 29 positive trends were predicted by chance alone. Third, in published analysis, Dr. Robert Terone has observed that IARC importantly failed to note that hemangiosarcomas were not replicated in the other mouse study IARC considered, which was further confirmed by EPA in its recent draft analysis of 6 mouse and 8 rat cancer bioassays. Fourth, linear low-dose response modeling for the NSRL derivation is in part based on IARC's conclusion of strong evidence of genotoxicity and oxidative stress. However, IARC did not consider extensive high-quality genotoxicity data that led multiple regulatory agencies, including OEHHA, to conclude that glyphosate is not genotoxic. I have published the conclusion that IARC also did not follow its own working group recommendations in its assessment of oxidative stress, and that the studies cited by IARC do not plausibly support increased oxidative stress potential in humans. Finally, other cancer endpoints identified by IARC cannot be used for an NSRL derivation, and that those endpoints, like hemangiosarcomas, were not replicated across multiple rat and mouse bioassays, and thus are inconsistent with glyphosate-induced animal carcinogenicity. In conclusion, an NSRL based on male mouse hemangiosarcomas is not justified. As stated by Dr. Jerome, the IARC analysis represents a, quote, flawed and incomplete summary of the experimental evidence, close quote. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Trent Norris, a partner at Arnold & Porter, K. Scholler, and outside counsel to Monsanto Company on Prop 65 matters. As you've heard from two of Monsanto's scientists, the scientific evidence demonstrates that glyphosate does not cause cancer, either in humans or in animals. This means that exposure to glyphosate at any level poses, quote, no significant risk, close quote, of cancer to humans. In other words, the NSRL should be infinite. OEHHA has the authority to establish infinite NSRL. Indeed, that's the appropriate approach where a chemical technically meets the requirements for listing, but the scientific evidence does not support a finding that the chemical actually causes cancer in humans. Monsanto, of course, does not agree that glyphosate is subject to listing under Proposition 65 and is challenging OEHHA's proposed listing in court on numerous constitutional grounds. But to the extent that OEHHA does decide to proceed to list glyphosate, the NSRL should be infinite because the scientific evidence shows that glyphosate does not cause cancer in humans at any level. The case that compels this result is Baxter Healthcare Corporation versus Denton, which was decided by the 3rd District Court of Appeal here in Sacramento in 2004. In that case, a medical device manufacturer sued OEHHA for a declaratory judgment that there is no significant risk of cancer to humans from DEHP, the chemical used in plastic products. Unlike with glyphosate, in that case it was undisputed that DEHP does cause cancer in rats and mice. Baxter argued, however, that DEHP could not cause cancer in humans. The trial court and the Court of Appeal agreed with Baxter. The courts explained that even though DEHP was properly listed under Proposition 65 based on sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity in experimental animals, the weight of the scientific evidence supported Baxter's argument that DEHP could not cause cancer in humans. In reaching that conclusion, the courts emphasized that evidence presented by OEHHA that DEHP may cause cancer in humans was not sufficient to set a numerical, non-infinite NSRL, where the weight of the scientific evidence suggested otherwise. The courts thus concluded that DEHP at any level poses no significant risk of cancer in humans, and thus that the NSRL for DEHP should be infinite. The case for an infinite NSRL for glyphosate is even stronger than it was in the Baxter case for DEHP. The weight of the scientific evidence demonstrates that glyphosate does not cause cancer in humans or in animals. Furthermore, OEHHA itself has concluded that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a cancer hazard to humans, and OEHHA reached this conclusion based on the very same studies that the IARC reviewed. In these circumstances, the only appropriate action by OEHHA is to determine that the NSRL for glyphosate is infinite. Under the Baxter precedent, OEHHA clearly has the authority to do this if glyphosate is ultimately listed under Proposition 65. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deborah Whitman, and I'm the founder and president of a nonprofit called Environmental Voices. And we educate people about toxic chemicals and how they affect our health and environment. We believe that glyphosate should be given a 0, no safe range, and should be banned in the state of California because it accumulates in the body, it's known to cause cancer, and there's no way to monitor the exposures in our food, our water, and the air. Like millions of people, I suffer from severe multiple chemical sensitivities. I've been hospitalized twice in emergency by collecting samples of herbicides that were sprayed by the state of California at the yellow bypass levees. So my question is, What about the dogs that are running when they go down on that levee? How can you determine how those people have been exposed to those toxic chemicals? I was trying to get a sign put up to warn the public that it was dangerous there after rain, and there was yellow foam all over that area. And so what about the birds that we're trying to protect in that yellow wildlife refuge? Also, I experienced my granddaughter's kindergarten class. I went there late and noticed that they were spraying Roundup on the grounds behind her class. The person I spoke to that said he was spraying Roundup had been there for several days. Not only that, but the schools regularly spray Roundup and other herbicides routinely in the schools, in the districts around Sacramento, and I don't know where else, but I know in Sacramento area. So how can we determine the exposure that those children are getting when they're out playing on the grasses and in the garden area? So another thing that I experience, because I get very sick, even if neighbors spray Roundup, I get headaches, the back of my neck hurts, I get sick to my stomach. That's how sensitive I am to those chemicals. So when you go into Home Depot and these other stores, like Lowe's, where do you find Roundup and these other herbicides? Right at the registers. How can you determine the exposure that these people that are working there 8 hours a day and exposed to that? I can't stand in line for more than a couple of minutes to pay for items without getting sick. So anyway, those are just some of the examples of the things that I experienced and why I started my nonprofit. So we urge you to stand up against the chemical manufacturers and suppliers of glyphosate products and protect the people who reside in or visit the state of California. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Harvey Makishima, CEO of PAPHC, which stands for Public Awareness and Preventive Health Care. And I'm also a member of the Guild and the Sacramento chapter. And I'm a mom, Moms Across America. Anyways, my vision isn't really good, but on our first chart, I wanted to just start with this one because when OEHHA does get glyphosate on Prop 65's listing of carcinogens, I wanted to show how pervasive it is, not just in California, even though it's probably one of the worst, but also throughout the nation. Notice the dark area of the United States. All of these dark areas have the most amount of glyphosate applied. And then notice in California, to the far left, how dark that area is in the Central Valley of California. This means to me that we're trapped. I mean, we've got this material, glyphosate, anywhere we turn. It's in the waters. And let's go to number 2. This is an interesting agricultural, well, it's almonds. And I love almonds, but they have, it's a graphic showing a map of California where the almond industry uses the most GBH, or glyphosate-based herbicides, in California as of 2014. During that year, 300 million pounds of GBH were sprayed in the USA. California gets about 13% of that total, which is 7 times more than other states on average. Let's go to number 3. This table is from DPR, the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and it's a pesticide use report, and it goes from 2008 to 2013. Let's take a look at just one of those, and my vision isn't so good that I can see it, but there's one at 1.5 million. Is it higher up?
Yeah, no, right there,
Okay.
Fresno, yeah.
And a lot of these counties are spraying and applying glyphosate just everywhere, essentially. I mean, the parks, the sidewalks, you name it, it's being used. Unfortunately, way too much for the children that are playing in these areas. Let's go to number 4. The next item is an article about the study of the USGS, United States Geological Survey, where the new research indicates that while the presence of some chemicals in streams has decreased over the last decade due to new regulatory restrictions, newly developed pesticides such as neonicotinoids and glyphosate are now the biggest polluters of water. Let's see. Their findings indicate that about 90% of urban streams contain pesticide concentrations exceeding allowable levels for aquatic life compared to only 50% in the previous decade. So the extensive use of it has increased, and we're having to live with it, unfortunately. Let's move to number 5 before my time runs out. This is a sample of the USGS survey in California, and as you can scroll down slowly, you can see the numbers of areas and the counties that have these levels of glyphosate is just about everywhere, extensively throughout California. These are in our surface waters, which I understand, of course, is going to be our source of drinking water. Now, as a California citizen, I'd have to object to any level. I'd have to go with 0 because I don't want to drink that type of water. I thank you very much.
Hello, my name is William Brooks. I'm with the Guild, I'm an engineer. Thank you for having this. Your group is tasked with the protection of the environment, so I want to carry on with the water in the environment. And I want to say that glyphosate herbicide formulations with their additives and associated metabolites contaminate and harm all facets of our ecosystem, including the water, non-target plants, aquatic organisms, amphibians, fish, reptiles, invertebrates, other animals, and soil biology. In my handout, I have peer-reviewed independent studies showing such things as fish reproductive problems, early-stage embryo mortalities and premature hatching, death rates of up to 86% in juvenile amphibians, major loss of species, even in cases less than 1,000 micrograms per litre. In fact, 2 species of tadpoles were totally eliminated with the implied increase in mosquitoes and West Nile virus. Other papers show an application proportional increase in Lyme disease due to tick increase from lizard eradication, plus impaired honeybee colony performance and decline in monarch butterflies. Harvey covered the USGS report that shows it's now prevalent in all our soil, surface and groundwaters, and a number of studies have shown that these toxic chemicals persist in the environment for 60 days in pond water and more than a year in pond sediment, with half-lives of up to 22 years in soils. It contaminates our drinking water via surface runoff, leaching into groundwater, thereby adding drinking water, bathing and washing water as possible routine exposure pathways. Monsanto have been aware of the carcinogenic nature of their product for 35 years. I have papers from the EPA that actually from them that show this. In 2015, Monsanto failed to reveal 8 papers with statistically significant tumour increases to the EU scientists determining legal levels in drinking water. Based on limited information, the EU still set an EU level of 0.05 micrograms, while the US allows a staggering 700 micrograms. Now, before my summary, I just have 2 points of relevance. A federal judge in the Prop 65 case unsealed court documents indicating Monsanto had lobbied officials at the FDA to kill any inquiries into safety. Court papers also reveal that in 2015, Monsanto executive William Hayden's emailed his staff to ghostwrite safety reports, and he would, quote, just get them to pay them to sign their names. Other court-released emails confirm this collusion with certain universities. In light of the fact, I would like to know more about the research on how the proposed NSRL level was determined, with only one other chemical on the long CA list with a higher level than proposed. It does not look like the quantitative risk assessment has been followed correctly. Plus, there's nothing to account for long-term endocrine disruption and bioaccumulation. Looks like a flawed assessment. When is somebody going to ignore the Monsanto lobbyists and the Monsanto manufactured safety reports and introduce precautionary safety levels to protect the environment and the people and the health of the people of California? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for having this hearing, and thank you all for being here today to witness a very important thing for our species to be able to deal with this very difficult chemical. I did not know how to wrap my head around what 1 part per trillion is. Can you? Raise your hand if you can wrap your head around it. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to help you here. 1 drop of ink into 1 part per trillion. 1 drop of ink into 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools is the concentration, which is the level that stimulated the proliferation of breast cancer cells in vitro. Thong et al. 2013, and I can't pronounce it. This is astounding, and it's very shocking. It is so low. Are our bodies the size of 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools? So that is minuscule beyond minuscule. And I would just like to, I'm from the California Guild, and I would just like to read a statement from Stephanie Seneff. Dr. Stephanie Seneff has authorized the California Guild to share for the purposes of the June 7th hearing today the powerful information provided to her from Dr. Anthony Samsel, who spoke already today, confirming Monsanto's withholding of critical scientific evidence of glyphosate's toxicity to animals and humans. Anthony Samsel, through the Freedom of Information Act, obtained tens of thousands of pages of secret Monsanto documents supposedly proving glyphosate is non-toxic to humans, mostly done before the 1970s when glyphosate got approved. He was forced to sign an agreement stating that he would not show these documents to anyone else. It's daunting. It's a daunting task, looking through these unsearchable documents, but Anthony has found some that clearly showed toxicity, but were buried and labeled, quote, secret, end quote. He has published some of this information in our papers. A key trick is to swap in historical controls to drum up more instances of cancer in the control group. These controls date back from the time when DDT was widespread and probably got more cancer because of that or some other toxic chemicals that have since been banned, like PCBs. Monsanto also did a study where they radio-labeled glyphosate and then traced the radio label in various tissues. They found the highest levels in the bone marrow. I think it preferentially accumulates in cells that proliferate because it's taken up actively along amino acid transporters, and glyphosate is an amino acid. And it has been demonstrated in a recent study that this happens. Proliferating cells have a high demand for amino acids. To conclude, they found significant levels of radio-labeled in the muscle tissues which did not show up as glyphosate in the standard glyphosate test. They hypothesized that it was bound to the protein and therefore remained hidden and undetected. I suspect it was actually embedded within the proteins because it substitutes for glycine during protein synthesis. I think this is its main mechanism of toxicity. Although carrying around toxic metals and dropping them off in acidic environments is also a nasty thing that it does. This is signed by Stephanie Seneff, Senior Research Scientist, MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, well, I'm a telecom tech and I'm not a scientist. My interest in this is an organic consumer, so I defer my time to those who agree with me that 0 is the appropriate amount for glyphosate in California.
So I'm a science teacher, retired, of middle school kids, and mama, grandma, and grandma, and we have an organic farm, and I have a love of food and of healthy families and family stories. Now, my grandparents' day, 1 in 20 people got cancer, 1 in 20. Now look to either side of you to find 2 men. One of those 2, 1 out of 2 men is going to get, 1 out of children, 1 out of 2, it may be more by the time they grow up. And look to the other side of you at the women here. 1 out of 3 women get cancer, and of our children will probably be more. So this glyphosate has this glycine, which is a building block of an amino acid, and it substitutes in and it changes the action of our enzymes that digest, that give commands to our body. And how do you find the causes of cancer? Well, there's so many ways. One way is to look at we did the pictures of where they spray.
You have to bring it to the mic.
But, sorry, where in California the farming is that's spraying in the almond orchards and down below that in the cotton fields, and then look at, say for instance, thyroid cancer. Think of the farm workers that go in there to work, because we're now burning down our crops with glyphosate 4 days before harvest. We spray our food with weed killer. It's called a death harvest. And it's real nice and dry and then easy for farmers. And then we eat it. And the farmers go in and harvest. Well, in Central America, in Guatemala, 1 out of 4 of the farm workers is dying of kidney failure. And in El Salvador and Sri Lanka, there have 20,000 people that died from kidney failure and 400,000 that have it, and they banned it. Monsanto sued them that they couldn't ban it, they couldn't prove it causes kidney failure. So anyway, when we see all of the farm workers coming in on the southern border, I don't say build a fence, I say ban glyphosate. Because what are the widows working to do when their husbands and their fathers are dead? So this is 973, and I love family stories, but I am also a historian for my high school class, 700 members. And I'm surrounded by guys that went to Vietnam, and women, and even the children and grandchildren of veterans who have cancers from Agent Orange, which Monsanto told us was safe. I look at Anniston, Alabama, where for decades Monsanto claimed PCBs were safe, and they dumped them in the river. And all those people, they spent millions of dollars. It's pollute until lawsuit. So do we want to keep polluting, or we just want to get rid of this chemical? Now, we have a choice here. We can label it. We're only asking to have a label. So when you have an apple, you know if it's got that much glyphosate in it. If a person can't afford anything, it's better than starving, eat something with Roundup. But if you have a choice, and you can afford to buy food for your family without weed killer, then it's labeled. And we just ask for an honest label, and I say 10 parts per quadrillion, because at a part per trillion, you've got breast cell proliferation. And then you have to consider that it's multiplied by risk factors, as Dr. Farrow talked about, the children, and the fact that we have no testing for the mixture. And the mixture is 1,000 times more toxic than the individual chemical, because the adjuvants, the detergents that go in, get that Roundup to soak in, also soak into the experimental animals and the people and the plants. You cannot kill a plant with Roundup in sterile soil. Roundup was patented as an antibiotic. We have a patent number on it. And it preferentially kills the good germs, and it leaves Salmonella staph, C. difficile, and fungi. Those overtake the plant and kill it. So you have sickly plants, you're eating sickly food, and the second way Roundup was patented was to get the chemical scale out of, the mineral scale out of pipes. So it chelates, it grabs the manganese, the magnesium, the copper, the zinc, things that are vital for the growing children's bodies, vital for the soil, vital for the plants. It makes them unavailable. If it doesn't have minerals because it's had too much Roundup, it just sits there and it doesn't degrade. That's why we have a Roundup sitting around. My time's up. Okay, that's it.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Elko, and I'm here as a mother and as an educator. I'm passionate about raising healthy children and building healthy communities. I'm excited to see so many of you here today also share that passion. I came today to voice my concern for any levels of glyphosate above 0. There's an obvious growing base of scientific evidence showing dangers, including some of the studies already shared here today, such as the one mentioned demonstrating causation between glyphosate and liver disease. And in that study, the exposure to glyphosate was at far lower levels than the proposed 1,100 micrograms. I also wanted to share one other piece of evidence of a lake here in California called Lake Matthews. This picture shows where glyphosate was applied. And I have evidence here of the dates of application, the amounts of application. Not long after that application, there was a huge problem with toxic algae. And in response to that, there was then a large application of copper sulfate to treat the toxic algae. And I just wanted to present this as an example of how there can be secondary problems related to glyphosate's use. For example, copper sulfate can cause problems in our own bodies and in those of other animals because the copper's presence can inhibit the absorption of other important elements like zinc, which could be one of the reasons why we are seeing fertility problems, because it can inhibit male sperm. I thank you for considering the science here today, and I implore you to use your position to protect the health of Californians and of our children. Thank you.
This is a highly political issue. I want to urge you to have strength when the review of ethics in addition to the science. The practice of burn down on grains and fruits or vegetables adds to an impossible toxic burden. In parts per billions, 2 parts per billion I've read, I've seen studies to where damage is shown, DNA damage. So I would like you to have to think about this practice of burn down, where we're using glyphosate to dry crops in the field just so they can add a few more poundage to their yield, okay? Now, I think you can lead by example, and I urge you to have strength, and I pray for you to have strength in this issue. It's a highly political issue. I could go on and on, my colleagues have spoke, but and we lead by example because they're spraying glyphosate where in parts per billion you can have a problem it can affect our DNA. Our fruits, vegetables, it goes in the air, it's going into the water. This practice we cannot stop this practice. This Prop 65 isn't to stop burn down, but through your ruling, we could limit the amount by taking the food producers that have chosen not to lead, but we need to step up. I've been an advocate, and we have gone to the public and shown, we've brought out the facts, okay? And we need government to step up and get out of this presidential panel on cancer. They told us, it was a $1 billion study, and they told us about the flaws with the studies, and they told us 85% of cancer is avoidable if we just choose to what we put into our bodies. But how can you choose when you're using this practice of burn down on everything that we eat? Okay? This was supposed to be used on genetically engineered products, and now they're using it on everything. If you look at the pharmaceutical companies, okay, this is short, when they use one medication for something that wasn't used, and this is another instance, okay? So I want to tell you just a fast little story. We've been out in the public and we talked to women through Moms Across America, Label GMOs, get the message out about endocrine disruptors. And we have been out there, and when we talk to this issue about premature aging of our children through glyphosate, that their eyes get big as silver dollars because they start pointing to their daughters and saying like they just can't believe what we're saying, that their daughters, because the children now can have sex, that they're fully developed at like 9 years old, 9 and 10 years old, and the mothers are blown out, and we have seen this, so I urge you to have strength. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Johnny Blackster, and I am the Ventura, California chapter leader for the Weston Price Foundation. The Weston Price Foundation is a national, international actually, nutrition education 501c3 foundation. And similar to Zen Honeycutt, who's here from Moms Across America, I speak daily with people who contact me for help around dietary choices, sources of clean food, and I can tell you that almost across the board what I hear very consistently, especially from moms with 6 kids, is issues with the microbiome and the human gut. To me, this is so important because we know that approximately 70 to 80% of our immune system receptor sites are located in the intestinal lining of our gut, and therefore the correct functioning of that immune system, and in parentheses I have cancer, is directly dependent upon having the proper healthy microbiome. That is to say, the microbial community in the gut must be healthy for our immune system to be functioning appropriately. This is the first time I've ever come to a public hearing, and as a person who directly not only writes but speaks to people about the presence of neurotoxins in our environment, I have to say, well, first of all, I want to thank the doctor first for the very clear presentation about how the determinants were made. Very, very helpful as a member of the public. I want to appreciate you for that. But I also have to say that I was a little shocked that the recommendations that are being made for an area as large as the state of California was a little surprising to me, that basically they're, as far as I understand, it's based on one single study of a 2-year study on mice. To me, that is absolutely not enough. The reality is that there is no safe level of glyphosate exposure to humans, particularly babies, and the reason for that is simply because it bioaccumulates. We know that now. We also know, and it's been referenced several times, that glyphosate increases the growth of breast cancer cells in parts per trillion. This chemical has been shown to be a neurotoxin, an endocrine disruptor, a mineral chelator, an antibiotic, and a carcinogen which causes liver disease. It's been found in our tap water, our children's urine, mother's breast milk. So in breast milk that is going to babies that are trying to build their bodies and brains, and also childhood vaccines. So once again, I just want to emphasize that no comprehensive independent study has ever been done that shows real life exposure. I also want to say that it's interesting to me as a member of the public, and granted I will hold up my hand here if I'm ignorant, but to notice that tumors and genetic disease are the 2 primary aspects upon which a determination of cancer is made. And we're not hearing anything about measuring levels of gut enteropathy. Gut enteropathy is highly, highly associated with the presence of cancer. Gut enteropathy, for those who don't know, is just simply the degeneration of the intestinal lining. And the reason this is so important is because that's where our immune system receptor sites are, as well as the microvilli, which are what we absorb our nutrients through. So when gut enteropathy is present, you basically die from malnutrition. I also want to reference Stephanie Seneff again. As a senior researcher at MIT, she has shown an extremely significant Pearson correlation coefficient rate of 0.99 between the rise of autism in this country and the sales of autism. Roundup, sorry. And a coefficient rate like that happens virtually never in real life situations. That is extremely significant. As a patented antibiotic, glyphosate has been shown to contribute to the creation of antibiotic-resistant superbugs. And it also kills health-promoting bacteria in the human gut, without which that immune system located there cannot function. So thank you so much for doing this public hearing.
I'm here today on behalf of more than 1,500 people with non-Hodgkin lymphoma after extensive use of Roundup. Over 100 of them are Californians, some of them are children. I'm also here on behalf of and in favor of transparency and the ability to effectively regulate, and I support you on that, obviously. I think it's important to note that while Monsanto executives have been heard today and their attorneys, this is not the first time they've been heard by OEHHA on this issue. They've had closed-door meetings in the past so that they could speak to this agency about the safe harbor level. And I would ask that sort of meeting, when it goes on, if you find it to be appropriate, that you make a public notice of that sort of goings on as well, and that you give due chance to the other side. Maybe you could have a closed-door meeting with oncologists or cancer patients on the subject. The latter group, not having a $15 billion a year business, understandably doesn't have as much of a voice, but it's the government that can give them one. I want to note also that the single mouse study, the CD1 study that's being relied upon, was done by a glyphosate producer, by a member of the Joint Glyphosate Task Force. And again, with many other people, the agency has yet to consider in this safe harbor calculation any formulated product studies. And as we heard again and again, the degree of carcinogenicity is perceived to be vastly different with the formulated product. I'll say again, and reiterate what other people have said, that I think from a public health standpoint at least, that it would be more appropriate to take a conservative approach and look at lower dose rodent studies, and they exist. The Lancaster rat study has been mentioned. It is public health that's the end point here. And then, again, reiterating what many people have said today, I don't understand why the agency is not considering epidemiology. I'm not terribly bright, that's why I went to law school, but I know that epidemiology is what we use for causality in humans, and what we use for both hazard and risk assessment in humans. When we know something causes cancer, it's unethical to do a clinical trial with humans. There exist epidemiological studies. There's a meta-analysis which shows that overall epidemiological studies are statistically significant. And they're also measuring real-world human exposure levels, which the mouse study is not. Just close by saying California is not known for lagging behind history and being on the wrong side of history, and I'd urge you to not do so here, and I would ask that the agency consider the source of the data and the conclusions that are presented to it. Thank you.
But here's the thing, I woke up this morning, I'm just going to speak from my heart. I woke up this morning to a picture of my friend Tiana, who now is dealing with cancer. Now, do we know whether or not it was glyphosate that caused her cancer? Of course we don't know, because really we don't know what the safe levels of glyphosate are. When I first started thinking about glyphosate in our daily exposure to it, one of the first things I did is I went to my loaf of bread to see, was glyphosate listed as an ingredient? And it's not. I went to my eggs. Is there glyphosate on my eggs? It's not listed. I looked at the pasta. I looked at the sandwich meat. I looked at the fruits and vegetables. There's no label that says whether or not I'm exposing myself and my family to glyphosate. So I honor you, I appreciate you, and I know that you've got a really tough job. But one of the wonderful things about having an agency and a body like yours is that you get to take a look at the health of our people, and you get to discern your observation, the observations of parents in the room that you're hearing from today, the observations of testimonies that you're going to get by email and by fax. And you're going to get to realize that not all observations happen in the laboratory. Many observations happen way after the fact. And to do your due diligence, I think it's important to really look at the facts. The facts are that we're sick. It shouldn't be acceptable that 1 in every 2 men is going to experience cancer. It shouldn't be acceptable that 1 out of every 3 women is going to experience cancer. And God only knows how many children. It shouldn't be acceptable that we're living in a toxic environment where children are having to deal with autoimmune issues. That's why you're here. You're here to protect the environment from chemicals. You're here to protect human beings, animals, water sources, and our air from toxic chemicals. That's your job. And I know that you know that. And that's why I love you, because you're the last defense. You're the body of people that gets to determine our future in this regard. And I'm all for business. I really am. I'm a small business owner. I'm here on my own dime because I believe in this. But I believe in responsible business. And I don't think that we should look at, well, how much of a toxic chemical should be allowed. I think we should look at that we have the right to know what's toxic at all. So in my opinion, there is no level of toxic exposure that should be considered safe. So at the very least, please rule, I'm not sure what the language is, but please determine that there is no safe level of glyphosate for human beings. And on behalf of my children and on behalf of my friend Tiana, who doesn't even know that I'm mentioning her name here today, thank you for doing what you do. I know that it's a really hard job, but I'm counting on you to protect us the way that your job gives you the authority to do. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. Instead of NSRLs, no significant risk level, we should be discussing glyphosate as NSFHC, not safe for human consumption. 55 years ago, Rachel Carson sat before a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C., and testified about the significant risks and dangers of heavily used pesticides, especially DDT. As a result of her testimony, not only was DDT eventually banned, several other outcomes arose, including the eventual creation of the EPA. And here we are so many years later discussing an herbicide far more dangerous, more widely used and destructively used than the pesticide DDT. And we're scratching our heads in an attempt to determine the level of safety for something that so many valid tests have determined to be unsafe for human consumption. Now we know that the Monsanto doctrine, Monsanto scientists, and others of their ilk have produced inside industry corporate science supporting the notion of the safety of glyphosate, often refuting the proven independent science of bioaccumulation, sufficient facts, and evidence of proof. But then again, we must remember that Monsanto and their cronies are motivated by profit and greed, not by solid science, honest facts and evidence, truth, or caring about the safety and health of our children and families. We citizens calling for a safe and sane environment are motivated only by caring and responsibility for the health and safety of our families and future generations. I and many groups I work with call for an immediate ban of the use of glyphosate around schools, public parks, waterways, and more. 10 miles of safety zones need to be created in order to protect our children and families. They eat and they play in those areas, and they're surrounded by this herbicide toxic soup. Let us also protect our farm workers from glyphosate, for without them our tables would be empty. They risk far too much to feed us all. However, rather than create extra paperwork, numerous meetings, years of wrangling over this or that level, and fighting the corporate behemoths like Monsanto, we could just take the wise and great leap forward and ban glyphosate entirely, and soon, and join some of our foreign allies in their wise decision to do so for the health and safety of their citizens. In California and the USA, we should do no less. Our present and future generations will thank us. Physicians have taken the Hippocratic Oath to first do no harm. I am guided by the spiritual code of Tikkun Olam to repair or heal the world. I and many other people invite you to join us. Our world, our environment is crying out for us to do so now. Glyphosate is unsafe for human consumption. Zero tolerance is the only safe level. Let's get that done. Thank you.
My name is Emily Rooney. I'm president of Agricultural Council of California. Ag Council is an association representing approximately 15,000 farmers, ranging from small farmer-owned businesses to some of the world's best-known brands. We will be submitting formal written comments after today's hearing, but I wanted to offer some comments. I'm going to go in a little different direction than I normally do when I come to testify before this body. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal background and my experience with California farmers, just to tell a little bit of the story of some of our practices. My family has been in California agriculture for 4 generations. We have a family farm on my mom's side and a ranch on my father's side. That's been passed. 3 of those 4 generations on my dad's ranch side have actually been passed through women. We take farming and ranching very seriously in our family. I'm also a mother of a 3-year-old, very healthy and active son, Jake. And we go out to the ranch every weekend. And so I've witnessed firsthand the care that we take in our land and in our animals and in our crops to make sure we do things very safely, because my family lives out there. And if it's not safe for us, we know it's not safe for everybody else, but we feel very blessed to be able to live in this lifestyle, and we take good care of our environment and our workers and our families, or our animals as well. I've worked in state and federal policy for about 15 to 20 years, and I can also attest that California farmers lead the world in environmentally sound farming practices, and we follow some of the strictest labor standards across the world. And glyphosate is a very vital tool in those sustainable farming practices. Through the use of glyphosate, we've been able to reduce passes in the field with the tractors and therefore reduce emissions, and we've also been able to reduce soil erosion. Glyphosate can and is being used safely. We are opposed to this listing, but if OEHHA is inclined to list, we support the proposed NSRL at 1,100 micrograms. And like I said, we will be submitting more formal comments, but thank you for your time today.
I'm Phil Alio with the Environmental Working Group here in Sacramento. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. First, I'd like to thank OEHHA for listing glyphosate under Law 65. I think we're losing sight of that I wouldn't say it takes courage to do it. You did the right thing, and Monsanto's suing because they don't like it. Understandable. It's their business model to sell as much as possible and to reduce what they see as regulatory burdens, while we think science should be used to protect consumers, the public, and the environment to the greatest extent feasible. The levels set by U.S. EPA, we think, are extremely high, is acceptable, and they acknowledge that Americans are eating a huge amount of glyphosate in their diets. Their last assessment in 2012 estimated American adults to be ingesting over 5 milligrams of glyphosate every day, 5 times more than what the state of California is defined as having no significant risk, and 50 times higher than the estimated 1 in a million risk of cancer. Personally, I'd rather deal with 1 in a million than 1 in 100,000, since so many people I know are getting cancer. It's kind of scary. When I was lobbying on the issue of BPA, which your DART committee finally listed, I told people in the Capitol, we don't know what causes cancer exactly. It's rare that you say you were exposed to asbestos or something like that. But if you're lying in bed dying of prostate cancer or breast cancer and you're 50 or 60 years old, it might pass through your mind like, what caused this? And you probably won't know. So it's your job to help us, defend us against all the chemicals that have been introduced into the society and that we are ingesting, breathing, drinking. We are submitting written comments before the deadline. We're going to suggest a lower level than what you are, but we appreciate your work. Thank you very much.
I'm here today. My name is Joe Robichaud. I've been a resident of Sacramento for about the last 40 years. I'm here just to give my personal testimony. In the late 70s, probably through the 80s, I was an avid user of Roundup. I had a rental in my home I'd use all the time, and I always took the Roundup precautions that they said it was to come in contact with your skin, wash it off right away and all that, and I followed that. Later on I found out from a medical source that regardless whether you wash it off, it would permeate your body and you would find effects. Back then I know several times I developed nausea, and I think on the label it said that that would happen. So I'm asking today, why would they allow any amount of a toxic chemical like this, knowing its potentials, to be put in a chemical? 2010, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Don't know how I contacted it. And my life quality since that time has totally degraded. My last, what we call is a PET scan that I got, I'm in remission. But like I said, my lifestyle, I was always very active as a sportsman, out there doing things, and my lifestyle has just really gone down. So I'm asking you, everyday people, why would we have to wonder where we're at, what we're doing, and out in the field? I was an avid sportsman with my dog out in the grain field. Why would we have to even consider thinking, am I going to come in contact with this chemical? You know what I mean? Why would we even, if we know any of its potentials, even allow it? So I'm here today in opposition to the use of glyphosate, and like I said, that's just my personal testimony. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a resident of Mill Valley, California. I'm a board member of the pesticide-free zone. I think one of the things that your assessment ignores are children. You do an assessment based on a 70-kilogram person. I mean, how small is a fetus? How small is an unborn child? Our children are being born pre-polluted. The Environmental Working Group did a study back in 2005 along with Commonweal. And what they tested for 400 chemicals in the umbilical cord blood of newborns. They found 287 chemicals. So I ask you, how can you assess the synergistic effect of glyphosate with 287 chemicals that already exist in a newborn? And the answer is you can't. You can't do that. Mathematically, that's impossible. So you can't make an accurate assessment of the health risks to a pre-polluted baby. You just can't. So I'm asking you to consider the health of our unborn children. And when you did your assessment, you used a linear dose response. And glyphosate has been proven to be an endocrine disruptor. I know the EPA says it's not, but the Endocrine Society of America, which is a professional medical organization, has put out a position paper that says that the EPA testing was inadequate, and that there needs to be new testing, and that we need to follow the precautionary principle. And I will be submitting that position paper from the Endocrine Society to you. And when we look at public health, the latest statistics out of the CDC is that cancer is now peaking at the age of 25 to 40 years old. It used to peak at 70 to 75 years because it's a latent disease, but now it's peaking at 25 to 40 years. And wow, isn't it a coincidence that 25 years ago, GMOs entered the market? And GMOs are just a delivery system for pesticides and specifically Roundup. So I ask you to take into consideration the health of our unborn children. And I also ask you to take into consideration the really new science, which is called epigenetic transgenerational effects. I recently saw a presentation by Dr. Tyrone Haynes that talked about this, and he showed slides of mice. He showed the grandmother mouse who was exposed to a pesticide, showed no effect. He showed the mother mouse who had no exposure and showed no effect. And then there was the grandchild, and the grandchild was very deformed. These are transgenerational epigenetic effects. This is new science. It's showing up in our studies around DDT, which has been around a long time. And I'm really worried that this is what's going to happen with glyphosate. That in a couple of generations, we're going to find that there is no fertility anymore, and that our children are just totally deformed. So please, take into account the health of our unborn children. Thank you.
My name is Carolyn Cox, and I'm with the Center for Environmental Health in Oakland. I wanted to thank OEHHA for being a leader on the science on this, clearly very important chemical that is not only controversial, but people feel very passionately about for, really good reasons. I also want to thank, the whole state for its commitment to kind of being a lighthouse in terms of environmental protection in these stormy times. And also wanted to remind OEHHA of something that I know you're very conscious of, that the regulations for the NSRLs require OEHHA to make use of the most sensitive study. And so I want to encourage you to really think seriously about that. And I'm looking forward to submitting written comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Dr. Nathan Donnelly. I'm a former cancer researcher at Oregon Health and Science University, and I'm currently a senior scientist at the Center for Biological Diversity. On behalf of our members and supporters across the country, I'm here in support of the agency's decision to list glyphosate on Prop 65 list of carcinogens. The state has based this decision on the most comprehensive, transparent, and independent analysis of cancer-causing effects of glyphosate done by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. The IARC is truly the gold standard when coming to a hazard classification of any chemical agent or activity, and recent controversy around the agrochemical industry's undue influence in regulatory agencies in Europe and the US, including an investigation just announced today by the EPA's Office of the Inspector General looking at possible collusion between Monsanto and the EPA on their glyphosate assessment, has made it that much more important that sound science is recognized and utilized in a way that informs regulatory decisions. Science is built on transparency, and the agency has chosen the most transparent analysis of glyphosate done to date to base its decision on. I do have some serious concerns about the NSRL not being based on the most sensitive study of sufficient quality. Instead of hashing out these issues here, we will be submitting detailed written comments identifying our concerns in detail. But something I do want to bring up now involves different exposure scenarios. So the NSRL is currently based on dietary exposure and absorption through the intestinal epithelium of the gut. While this will likely be a major exposure scenario for those who don't use glyphosate, there will be farm workers and home gardeners and families that live in rural areas where spraying is common that will be exposed in ways above and beyond what they get through their diet. This includes absorption through the dermal layer of the skin, through the pulmonary epithelium of the lung, as well as ocular exposures. And these exposure routes can have very different absorption rates than that of the gut. And relying on toxicity studies that measure glyphosate exposure solely through the gut, there's a good possibility of the NSRL being underprotective to those who are exposed via different routes. These are obviously very complicated issues to address, I know, but it does not make them any less real or any less important. There are communities in this state that have a much higher propensity for exposure, and historically they have been completely ignored because they differ significantly from the general population in one way or another. So I hope this agency will keep these communities in mind when finalizing the NSRL. And to finish, I really just want to thank this agency for moving forward with plans to list glyphosate. You knew this was a politically charged issue. You knew it would be high profile. You knew there would be companies with deep pockets looking to tie us up in the courts, and you went forward anyway. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the work that you do and your willingness to follow the science and make hard choices in order to educate and empower the residents of the state.
Schools and PBF, TKFT retirees chapter.
Safe Ag, Safe Schools, that's our local organization.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm a
And
retired.
just following Lucia Calderon and Desiree Rojas after you.
I'm a retired nurse from the Pajaro Valley on the Central Coast. And again, I also want to thank you for listing glyphosate under Prop 65 and also for using the IARC recommendations because they're based on probable risk and not on the old-fashioned risk versus benefit assessment. I think we all applaud and support any decisions made using the precautionary principle, which looks for the option with the least harm. I couldn't really decipher all those comparisons of the levels, and after all I've heard today, I have a lot more studies and numbers running around my brain, although I did study toxicology and environmental exposure assessment and occupational environmental health at the graduate level. It was 20 years ago, and as a school nurse in a farm worker community, I had a lot to do while I was working at that job. But I think we've heard a lot of reasons to choose the most conservative figure all the way down to 0. We know that Roundup is ubiquitous and that there's been a dramatic rise in its use over the last 40 to 50 years, about 100-fold. It's on the shelf of every hardware store. It's in our sewage. It's in every bottle of California wine. It's certainly only one of many chemicals that our children, in particular our farm worker children, are exposed to. I have to say it's not the one that concerns me the most because we'll be back talking to you about chlorpyrifos, I hope soon. But I think we all know that the long-term effects of these individual chemicals are still under exploration. We don't really know. We certainly don't know about the effects of their so-called inert ingredients, and we don't know how they work in combination. The goal of the Prop 65 designation, one goal at least, is to get people to think twice before they buy that bottle that's right there by the check stand, and before they put it on their lawn, on their golf course, or on their school grounds. Our school board, with our encouragement, has eliminated the use of Roundup, but unfortunately they're understaffed and the weeds are growing because they don't really know what else they should do. But we do want to raise consumer awareness and hopefully increase consumer pressure so that eventually sales will cease and use will cease. Our governor and our California legislature have made a public decision to hold the line against the pushback from our newly elected federal designees who are rolling back our environmental protections against chemicals, against fossil fuels, and all the other assaults. It's time for California to take the lead in moving away from chemically dependent agriculture. The future of our children and of our planet depends on finding new solutions, and developing and exploring alternatives for weed control is a good place to start. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to just express my gratitude and appreciation for the work you're doing. My name is Lucia Calderon, and I'm submitting comments on behalf of Safe Ag, Safe Schools, along with a few other groups, Non-Toxic Santa Cruz, Project Pollinate of Santa Cruz, and the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council. Our organizations, representing tens of thousands of Monterey and Santa Cruz County residents, are deeply committed to protecting environmental and community health, particularly the health of agricultural workers and the families living and working near agricultural applications. We support your proposal to adopt an NSRL for exposure to glyphosate under Prop 65. However, the proposed 1,100 micrograms per day NSRL for glyphosate is not based on the most sensitive study of acceptable quality. We therefore request that OEHHA revise the NSRL to be based off of a dose of 31.49 micrograms per kilogram per day, which is the level indicated by the best available science. Included in the glyphosate analysis of the EPA's Cancer Assessment Review Committee are 3 high-quality studies demonstrating that exposure to glyphosate below 1,000 milligrams per kilogram per day leads to a statistically significant increase in the development of certain cancers. Wood et al. Of 2009 found a statistically significant increase in malignant lymphoma at 810 milligrams per kilogram per day. Stout and Rucker of 1990 found a statistically significant increase in pancreatic islet cell adenomas in male rats at 89 milligrams per kilogram per day and at 940 milligrams per kilogram per day. The Lonkus et al. Study of 1981 mentioned earlier found a statistically significant increase in testicular interstitial tumors in male rats at 31.49 milligrams per kilogram per day. The state of California has taken an important step in listing glyphosate as a known human carcinogen, but the listing is only as effective as the NSRL will allow. We must ensure that people will not potentially be exposed to levels of glyphosate that can cause them harm. Our organization strongly urge OEHHA to base the glyphosate NSRL off of a value of 31.49 milligrams per kilogram per day, the level based off of the most sensitive study. And lastly, as the organizer of Safe Schools, which is a community coalition concerned primarily about the health impacts of chronic and cumulative pesticide exposure on the health of families and children living, working, and attending school near fields, I want to reiterate that the 70 kilogram weight.
Thank you very much for having this hearing today and for opening to all the information you're receiving. I'm a clinical nutritionist. I work with people with chronic health issues. I've seen so many people that wouldn't even be able to sit here today and go through a full 4 hours of discussion, either because their children are disrupted because of their behavior or because of their own health being so poor. I've also just had the benefit of seeing a very long life. My mother just died at 99 years of health. But on the other hand, I work with these very sick children. And I know that anything that's going to disrupt the major organs of elimination of the body, especially the liver, is going to have a huge impact on the health of the child throughout their years. And then when they get into their teens, even their own hormonal changes and cycles will be too difficult for them to handle. So I encourage you to please listen to the information. If it wasn't an issue, we wouldn't all be here. We're all here because of the importance of this issue. I know that you've been presented with some information saying that it should be an infinite limit and that there's no carcinogenic or any other factor. If that was true, we wouldn't be here. But what we need to understand is that there is an aspect that has been spoken about over and over about bioaccumulation. And the fact is, it's very hard to limit. Once you open the door, it's very hard to limit what is going to start being sequestered in a person's body. Again, I thank you. I thank everyone here who has taken the time to give this information. And when I came in here, I drove up 80, Highway 5, and saw the signs in the middle of town saying, field or farm to fork. I think it said field to fork or farm to fork. And that really sums up why we're here today. It's a very specific and a very significant issue. And I hope that your findings will be that no level is safe.
Hi, I'm Sharon Larson. I live in Citrus Heights. I got involved in this issue because my grandchild doesn't look like this. She can't sit up. She can't hold her head up. She can't stand up. She can't talk.
Microphone.
Use the microphone.
No, you can hold it up. Just use the microphone.
She has cerebral palsy, low-tone cerebral palsy, which means that she can't really chew food or swallow without aspirating food. Consequently, she became very, very thin and emaciated. Her pediatrician said that she needed to have a G tube. If you don't know what that is, it's a tube that goes into your stomach where you're fed fluids. The fluid that she is still being fed because her mom and dad don't really understand about glyphosates. As most people don't understand, a small percentage of people in this country seem to even know anything about it or understand the word. The reason I'm here is because she was prescribed Pediasure. It comes in a can. Moms across America did their own testing of this product and found that it was very high in glyphosates. I'm not a scientist, but I know that it's, I'm sorry to say it this way, but it was either 1,500 or 15,000 times stronger than what's allowed in the water in France and Germany. I believe that it's that way because it's made from corn and soy that is grown by Monsanto and sprayed with Roundup. This product is given to all vulnerable children that are not able to eat, and also to 6 adults that have to be fed through a G-tube or have to drink fluid because they're really ill and they're in the hospital, they're elderly, they have cancer. This product and other products like it, there needs to be no glyphosate. We had no idea that that was in what my granddaughter was being fed until I just started researching the nutritional value and found the study that had been done by Moms Across America. So I believe there should be no glyphosates. There's no label on this product that's being fed to children. And since then I found out it's also in formula and many other products that most parents have no idea what they're feeding their children or their grandchildren or their sick relatives. So I hope and pray for your help in banning this product, especially in products for children, and if it's not banned, labeling it so people at least know that they're poisoning their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana Ruday from the California Guild. I also wanted to commend OEHHA for moving forward with this listing of glyphosate. The Detox Project tests food products for organizations such as Food Democracy Now! And Organic Consumers Association. I was told today that Dave Murphy of Food Democracy Now! Was going to be here today and wanted to speak, but he could not make it due to a conflict. The Detox Project notes that glyphosate residues are rarely tested for in final food products by any regulators or companies worldwide, including the high glyphosate-resistant crops of soybean, which about 90% are genetically modified, and maize, about 70%. The Detox Project recommends that methods for clinical testing, including glyphosate testing, should always have minimum limits of detection of 0.5 parts per billion or lower, and we advocate for much lower, for urine and water testing. They claim that chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry, can't say that, testing methods are the most responsible methods that should be used for this testing of urine, water, or food for glyphosate. According to the Detox Project, the current no significant risk level being proposed here would not result in labeling of any of the numerous foods that have been identified to date to contain glyphosate by the Detox Project. The other thing I just wanted to mention is related to the gut microbiome. It has been mentioned before in other testimony today, but I just wanted to mention a finding by Keith Bell. He's a citizen scientist, and he says that gut microbiome make or break amino acids and prepare them for absorption. Keith Bell notes that gut microbiomes also regulate how amino acids cross the blood-brain barrier, affecting mental and emotional health. According to Keith Bell, Roundup shuts down amino acid synthesis in bacteria intended to kill weeds because the same pathway for amino acid synthesis, the shikimate pathway, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, is used by plants. Although when glyphosate was first placed on the market, scientists weren't factoring in the collateral damage of Roundup to soil and gut bacteria because microbes that weren't viewed at that time as crucial to public health. We know more now, and we need to respond to this new knowledge today. Thank you.
Everyone's familiar with the Farm Bureau. I know a lot of people think it's a state organization because it's an old word, but we're the largest nonprofit and oldest general farm organization in California. We have a lot of policies, and I've worked with the Farm Bureau for 27 years in doing a lot of the environmental issues. What's very important to the members of the California Farm Bureau, which are farmers and ranchers, is that if we do use chemicals, that we use them very, very carefully and judiciously. That's very important to our membership. The Farm Bureau does not agree with the listing of glyphosate under Prop 65. Glyphosate, as was mentioned earlier, is a very important tool in conservation tillage. It allows us to reduce our tractor passes, and why that's important is you're using less diesel, which means you have cleaner air. You're able to sequester carbon because you're not disturbing the soil. So these are important for the environment, and so there's a lot of co-benefits, and we'll go into that more at length in our comments. We know that nearly 24 regulatory and scientific bodies internationally reviewed the same 4 animal studies that IARC, the working group, and they reached the opposite conclusion, which is that glyphosate is not shown to be carcinogenic. Given that OEHHA has changed their minds since their 2007 review and now proposes listing, we only ask that the NSRL be absolutely no lower than 1,100 micrograms per day that's proposed. We do not agree that it be listed, but if you're going to do it regardless of the scientific weight against this decision, then a fair NSRL is important so that we aren't prevented from using an effective tool for agricultural production and instead are faced with frivolous lawsuits. Thank you.
I actually didn't come prepared to speak, but I spoke with Zen and she had me speak, given that I am a concerned citizen as well as married to a farmer in California. And I want to thank you very much for all the time and effort that you've spent working with this issue and this David and Goliath, seemingly very, very important issue. So what Zen had me share, given that I'm in the farming industry, is the annual average of glyphosate pounds used on our different crops. And there's 70 that are listed here. And this is from data that is from the United States Department of Agriculture's National Agricultural and Statistics Service, as well as the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. So there's 70 crops that are listed here for California. And I started adding up the average amount of pounds of glyphosate. And this is from 2013 to 2014. And out of the 70, I added up just 13 of these particular crops that are abundant in California, some of them being alfalfa, almonds, cotton, grapes, all very much important to the economy. But what I did then was Googled the population of California, and that's 39 million people. So only on 13 products came out to 8 pounds of glyphosate per person for every man, woman, and child in California. And I know that you've said that there's been no exposure assessment, but I don't know how you look at any kind of risk exposure when every man, woman, and child is potentially looking at being exposed to 8 pounds of glyphosate per year. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I pray that all of our children will be considered in this decision. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, I hadn't intended to speak, but the distinguished representatives from Monsanto made a couple of statements that I had some questions on. I know we're not allowed to ask questions in this forum, but is there a way for me to find out if I heard correctly? May I restate them and have them say that I mishear?
Sure. I think that probably a better bet would be to, we're going to be posting the transcript and also the video of the hearing, and so you can listen to what they said directly or look at the transcript. But I don't think they're willing to come back up and have back and forth right now.
I'll just state what I heard, and we'll see later if I misheard this.
Okay.
They said that apparently cellular oxidative stress is the only cancer endpoint that should be considered, and they said no other cancer endpoints can be considered. And the other statement of the inference was that OEHHA should not rely on animal studies. I don't know if I heard this correctly, but it was stunning to me, so perhaps I misheard. If I misheard, please forgive me, because we know, everyone knows there are more cancer endpoints than cellular oxidative stress, the breast cancer study, which showed parts per trillion effects. The mechanism there is glyphosate has been shown to be an estrogen receptor agonist, which means it's acts like estrogen, but estrogen on steroids, no pun intended. And the estrogen receptor is a nuclear receptor. That means it binds to the DNA and acts as a transcription factor, and that's how it affects it affects not only that individual but subsequent generations. So I'd just like to hear that, if possible, clarified. Thank you for your time.
It was 5 minutes ago. I really was not going to speak. I accompanied my best friend here, Anthony Samsel. I myself have an organic farm in New Hampshire. We came all the way from New Hampshire. As a teacher for 20 years, I taught high school, and in one of my community service classes, their community service as a random act of kindness was to go into their father's shed and find the Roundup. Bring it to your father or your mother, whoever takes care of it, and ask them to bring it back to Lowe's and to Home Depot. I also told them, do not be prepared to ask for your money back. Just ask them to please dispose of it and do not put it in your property anymore. I taught these children for 20 years, all the freshmen, and all of a sudden I'm proud to say that I did that. I also have a husband at home, autoimmune disease, who was poisoned by water. He is now waiting on a double lung and a liver transplant. Being from New Hampshire, we look over at California. We think you people are cool. We love California. Do you understand the power that California has, not only on this country, but on the world? And I hope you make the right decision. Thank you.
My name is P.T. Rothschild, and I really didn't come here to speak, but the IRAC, or whatever it's called, the study that showed how bad glyphosate was, has been called into question. And our esteemed colleagues from Monsanto basically threw cold water on it. So what I was handed was a paper that showed that basically that test was very limited, it wasn't valid, and they should have looked at the people who got cancer from that same test, which is right here. I don't know if you can see it on a camera or whatever, but there's a whole bunch of people here that got cancer from that same study. So it's not just animals getting cancer, it's mammals and animals, humanoids and four-footers. That's pretty much all I'm going to say, except for one thing. Whether you're sitting back there or you're sitting down here, We're all eating the same food. We're all breathing the same air. And most of us are drinking the same water. A few of us are drinking real water that's alkaline or it's refined or whatever. But most people are just drinking the water. And none of us is going to get away from it. It's in the air, it's in bottles of wine, it's on your girlfriend's breath. So basically that's it. Now, whether or not you folks do the right thing or do anything at all, it's not really going to make a difference because Monsanto's in control of a lot of things, not just glyphosate. And so if you do decide something and you do the right thing, that's one step. But everybody out here, I know they all know that this is only one arm of the kraken that we're fighting. We're fighting a number of fronts, and glyphosate is only one. If we win on glyphosate, that's not going to cure anything. It's going to make us feel better. And we're already starting to see organic stuff in the major supermarkets, all from efforts that a lot of us have put out, saying on corners, flyers, all kinds of things. So education is the key. We have to educate people to understand that what they put into their body makes a difference. When I met John Diaz, I was a size 38.
Wow.
Thanks a lot. I was a size 38. He radicalized me. I know that's a bad word to use nowadays, but that's what happened. I cut out the Cokes, the Pepsis. I donated Subway on a political thing. They hire child traffickers. But I went from a 38 down to this. Now, I'll tell you why this is important. It's healthier, I look better, but I hang around with people who are about a third my age. I like that. I don't like looking like their grandfather. I talk hip, I can dance. That's it. So, thank you for what you're doing. I know we're up against, like I say, we're up against ultimate evil. But if you don't fight ultimate evil, evil will win, period. If you fight it, it may still win, but at least you can die happy because you were in the fight. You weren't sitting on the sidelines being a wallflower. Thank you very much.
Susan Hopp from Marin County. And I guess to sum this up, there have been so many eloquent voices and such passion. And I think you are all in a very tough position. On the other hand, I think in contrast, I loved the last gentleman's message, but I think that you can have tremendous impact. We've heard somebody from New Hampshire who talks about California. California has led on so many fronts. And so I hope that you will be inspired for your best selves to come forward and inspired by the passion of all these people, and think of someone like Rachel Carson and what she was up against in the 50s when she went, in the 60s when she went in front of Congress, and who she is today. So thank you so much for all that you're doing and what you're doing.
Hi, my name is Christine Daves, and I'm from Marin County. And I want to thank you for taking this issue on and how important it is. I grew up in St. Louis, 3 miles as the crow flies from Monsanto. My sister worked there, and I swam in the Mississippi River as a kid. My father had a boat, and I spent every single weekend in that water. We had a farm by that water as well. I know that river, and I know Monsanto. I had no idea growing up then what I would come to know now about the place that was just 3 miles from my home. I'm also a producer on the film A Permanent Mark, which looks at Vietnam veterans and their exposure to Agent Orange, cancer, and the epigenetic fallout hitting their grandchildren, and the extreme suffering that has and continues to happen to the Vietnamese families in Vietnam from Agent Orange, a Monsanto product. I'm also an advocate for parent groups with children suffering from chronic illness in all its forms. Autism, ADD, ADHD, all of it. I follow the moms. I follow the women. I have no children. But in order to get well from serious chronic illness, I had to dive into their world, and I did. And what I found was a world of children that I had no idea existed. I thought I was one of the only ones that grew up that way. I've recovered. These moms recover their children. And you know how they do it? Organic food. No chemicals, no pesticides, organic food, and they know what to do. They're powerful. They are a force to be reckoned with. They know the science. I follow their science. I know glyphosate is bad. It's very bad. And there are other agents inside there that, besides glyphosate, that are equally and even worse than glyphosate. So I ask you, please, thank you for taking this on, and I ask you to do your job the best you know how, because I know that you need to make the right decision on behalf of all the people that are here, all the families, the men, the women, those suffering and those not. In this state, in this country, and around the world, we're depending on you right now. They're all looking to you. Please make the right decision for all of us.